Good evening. I'm Patty Satalia with Penn State Public Broadcasting. Welcome to tonight's Common Ground Lobby Talk, Climate Change, Climate Justice, which is co-sponsored by Penn State's Rock Ethics Institute and Penn State's Research Unplugged series. We'll be examining the ethical, religious, and social justice implications of climate change. Our studio audience is invited to join the conversation with questions and comments. And I'd like to begin by finding out what brought you here tonight, what motivated you to come out into the rain. What were you hoping to hear and learn?
I'm concerned about the fact that I'm spending more and more money bringing heat into my house and gas into my car, and I don't know what's happening with the fuel situation and where it's going into the atmosphere.
There's much public debate about the science. I happen to already have a view about the science. I'm persuaded, but I think we've had far less conversation about the ethical implications of this, who's going to be harmed, and what the obligations are of those who have contributed to that harm.
I'm hoping to find out tonight whether there's any hope for my grandchildren and their children in time to come. I hope you have some answers.
Now I'd like you to meet our panelists. Dr. Richard Alley is an Evan Pugh Professor of Geosciences and Associate of Penn State's Earth and Environmental Systems Institute, one of the world's leading climate researchers. He has served on a variety of advisory panels and steering committees, including chairing the National Research Council's panel on abrupt climate change. He has provided requested advice to numerous government officials in multiple administrations, including a U.S. Vice President, the President's Science Advisor, and committees and individual members of the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. Dr. Nancy Tuana is director of Penn State's Rock Ethics Institute and the DuPont Class of 1949 Professor of Ethics. She is also the co-founder of the collaborative program on the ethical dimensions of climate change and one of the lead authors of the white paper on the ethical dimensions of climate change, which was released at the 2006 United Nations Convention on Climate Change. Jeff Schmidt is director of Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. He opened Sierra Club's Harrisburg office in 1983, making him the first full-time environmental lobbyist in Pennsylvania. Among other things, he's working on Sierra Club's Cool Cities program, which encourages local communities to take the lead in reducing global warming. Robert McKinstry is the Goddard Chair in Forestry and Environmental Resources Conservation in Penn State School of Forest Resources and an adjunct professor in the university's Dickinson School of Law. He is also a partner on leave from Ballard, Spar, Andrews, and Ingersoll in Philadelphia, where he was the co-founder and co-partner in charge of the firm's 24-lawyer environmental practice group. He was the counsel of record for a group of 18 leading climate change scientists who sued the EPA for its refusal to regulate carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles as required by the Clean Air Act, and prevailed in the April 2nd landmark case, Massachusetts versus EPA. Joy Bergey is Global Warming Outreach Coordinator for Penn Future and Project Director with the Pennsylvania Interfaith Climate Change Campaign. She works with private citizens, community groups, houses of worship, municipalities, and legislators on issues related to global warming. Thank you all so much for joining us. Before we really delve into the ethical dimensions of climate change, let's take a look at what is now widely accepted by the scientific community and by a growing number of policymakers about climate change.
The best science now shows that human activities are changing the composition of the air, which is changing temperature, storms, sea level, and other things. The changes so far have been small, and whether the coming changes will be much bigger depends on decisions that we will make. Burning fossil fuels for energy releases carbon dioxide. Consider your car. You do a fill-up, you put 100 pounds of gas in, and you drive away. As you burn that 100 pounds of gas, you add oxygen, and that makes 300 pounds of CO2 that drift away in the atmosphere. If it came out of the tailpipe the way waste came out of our transportation 100 years ago, as horse ploppies, it's a pound per mile driving down the road. We would cover every road in America an inch deep every year. That may not seem like a lot, but that's the roads out in the desert. That's all the roads. And just think about jogging in it for a minute and think what it would smell like. And cars are just part of it. Anytime we burn fossil fuels, coal or oil or natural gas, we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide is invisible to our eyes. If we had special sensitive infrared goggles, we could see the carbon dioxide coming out of the tailpipes and drifting across the landscape, hanging like a pall over the planet. So what does this mean? Naturally, the sun heats the planet, the Earth sends energy back to space, and the atmosphere traps some of that energy and keeps the Earth warmer so we're not frozen and we can live here. As we add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels, more of the sun's energy that the Earth is sending back to space is trapped by the atmosphere, and that makes us warmer still. So as we add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, the world warms. We've known about the warming effect of carbon dioxide for almost 2 centuries. As we burn gas and oil and other fossil fuels and add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, we expect the world to warm.
The world is warming. Thermometers show this, even thermometers far from the heat of the city, thermometers in the ocean, deep in rock and in soil, aloft on balloons. Even special thermometers on satellites looking down on the Earth show the world is warming. The permafrost is melting. Sea ice is disappearing. Glaciers are shrinking, even those getting more snowfall. Here is the Muir Glacier in Alaska, photographed in 1941. Here is the same glacier photographed from the same perspective in 2004. But is the warming today really being caused by rising amounts of carbon dioxide? A big volcano can send particles into the air, which blocks the sun and cools us for a few years. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Earth's orbit changed, bringing us a bit more warmth and taking us out of an ice age. Many things can cause climate to change. Geologic observations show us that ancient climate has ranged from cold to hot and back again over millions of years. But what about today? Are natural processes causing the world to warm?
So we take what we know about the climate and the natural factors that we think are important, changes in solar output, the influence of volcanic eruptions, and we put that into computer model simulations. The simulations are then able to reproduce the temperature changes that were actually observed and measured up until about 1900, but they cannot reproduce the 20th century warming. It's only when we add the influence of human beings, the increased greenhouse gas concentrations due to fossil fuel burning, that we're able to explain the overall observed 20th century warming. These same models tell us that if we continue to burn fossil fuels at current rates, let alone increasing rates, we're likely to see considerably greater warming in the future.
So we've seen that temperatures have gone up over the last 150 years, but that's nothing compared to where they could go over the next couple of centuries. We've just started on this warming trend. We have a lot more coal and oil to burn, and every year we burn more and more of it. If we continue to increase our carbon dioxide production globally, this warming trend could increase significantly. So far, surface temperatures have only gone up by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. However, the same computer models that correctly predicted this increase show that by the end of this century, surface temperatures could increase by 4 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And if we stay on this same trend for the next 300 years, global surface temperatures could increase by a whopping 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've only just begun to increase carbon dioxide levels. If we continue to do so, the warming could be very large. But what will the warming mean?
More warm weather will have significant impacts to life on Earth. As glaciers melt and the ocean water warms and expands, sea levels will rise. For instance, with a 5-meter rise in sea level, almost 1/5 of the state of Florida may be covered with water. Almost 1/4 of the state of Louisiana will be affected, and let's say 1/3 of a low-lying country like Bangladesh will be affected. Now, with a sea level rise of 25 meters, almost all of Bangladesh may be underwater, and most likely, most of the American West Coast may be underwater as well. Tropical diseases most likely will spread into new territories, such as malaria in Europe and the United States. And transmission rates are likely to increase, and in some cases, as in Europe, are likely to double. Also, many places where we grow our crops today may dry up during the summer. Now, initially, there will be winners and losers, with most harm coming to poor people in warm places. Africa is most likely the continent that will be most affected and most vulnerable, with more and more frequent droughts and floods to come. Yet, most studies show that harm will spread until it affects almost everyone, almost everywhere.
Past greenhouse gas emissions have already caused sizable risks for future generations. What are we to do now? In the past, societies have often chosen to reduce pollution in order to increase welfare. We have chosen to introduce sewers in order to reduce the risks due to human waste. Or we have chosen to change the way we do air conditioning and spray cans in order to reduce the risks of the ozone hole. In a similar way, reducing greenhouse gas emissions changes and reduces the risks of future climate change. How can we reduce greenhouse gas emissions? There are several ways. Right now, we can switch to fluorescent light bulbs, or we can take the bike instead of the car. We can start to sequester greenhouse gases into the ground. In the long run, we can substitute fossil fuels with energies derived from the wind, the sun, or biomass. The evidence suggests that the costs of reducing greenhouse gas emissions are less than the costs of inaction.
So what does this all mean? The people, the policymakers, have paid scientists real money to find out what is likely to happen. We see humans changing the composition of the air. We see this affecting the climate, the temperature, the storms, the sea level. The science is good. The data are there. This is real. It's real. It's real. There are solutions. There are things that can be done. The science is solid. It's now back to the people, back to the policymakers to decide what to do.
The scientific evidence clearly demonstrates that a continuation of business-as-usual greenhouse gas emissions will lead to significant changes in our climate, increasing risks to human welfare and to ecosystems. There's much we can do to reduce these risks by lowering greenhouse gas emissions. The question of how much risk we can impose on future generations is, in the end, an ethical question.
So the question now is what should be done about it? And I want to begin again with you, Dr. Tuana. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN in 1948, states that, quote, everyone has a right to life, liberty, and personal security. Are these basic rights being compromised because of climate warming, and how so?
These are the rights that are at risk with climate change. And this is the reason why we believe that it's crucial to put ethics at the table as we're beginning to discuss these issues. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has done an incredibly good job of bringing together our top scientists, our top economists, our top social scientists to think about what is the science. But we also need to have ethicists at the table, people who are attentive to the ways in which climate change may have a differential impact on people from different countries, on how climate change could really have an impact on ecosystems.
The United States comprises 5% of the world population and contributes 22% of global emissions. With that in mind, what would be our fair share of addressing this problem, and how do you sort that out ethically?
Developed countries have had more of an influence on climate change. We also need to take a lead on what the solutions will be. Not only the solutions to climate change, but our actions in the past, sometimes actions we didn't realize would have negative impacts, have had and will have negative impacts. We have to think about our ethical responsibility to mitigating the damages and responding to the damages that will be caused by our actions.
Okay, Jeff Schmidt, you say that the good news is that the tools today, we have the tools today to reduce global warming. Of course, if we have the tools and we don't use them, that certainly is an ethical problem right there in itself. In the absence of federal leadership, what can we do?
Well, first of all, many of us can take personal actions in our personal lives to reduce our impacts on global warming emissions. And it was mentioned changing your light bulbs to fluorescence and riding the bike, taking public transportation. Probably the biggest single thing we could do in the short term on a large scale is to require improved fuel efficiency, but that would require an act of Congress. Again, with the lack of federal leadership, we do have things we can do at the local level, in our local communities, and at the state level where there's more progressive political leadership. Sierra Club and other groups are working on a campaign that we call our Cool Cities campaign, which is designed to convince local government leaders that they can make a change locally by starting to evaluate their uses of energy, the way they operate their city fleets, and a number of communities across the country and here in Pennsylvania have agreed to start doing this. There's the United States Mayor's Agreement on Climate Change with a goal of reducing global warming gases by 7% by 2012 from 1990 levels, and we have over 400 mayors across the country that have agreed to implement changes to meet those goals, and they've signed the agreement. In Pennsylvania, the cities of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, most recently York, Erie, have all signed these agreements, and the challenge now is for them to implement them. Things that they can do at that level include things like looking at how their buildings are constructed and use energy-efficient building designs, reevaluating the existing buildings and retrofitting them to reduce energy use. They can also convert their city fleets or municipal fleets to hybrid vehicles and more fuel-efficient vehicles. And finally, they can look to where they get their energy supplies. Here in Pennsylvania, we have electric competition, and there are green providers out there, companies that use the energy that they sell come from wind and solar and biomass. And you can choose both at the municipal level, and institutions like Penn State and others are already making these choices.
Have you seen interesting, innovative things that you'd like to see adopted, things that you might not have expected cities to come up with on their own?
Well, one of the first actions that the city of York took was to evaluate their traffic signals, and they switched over to LED lights, and they were able to convince banks locally to float them the money to do it with the energy savings from the more energy efficient lights. They're going to be able to pay off the loan to switch over in just a couple years. I think it's going to save them about $70,000 a year, and it will reduce the amount of maintenance needed because you don't have to change the lights as frequently.
From a legal vantage point, what power do states and local governments and private organizations have to address this issue?
Well, actually they have an enormous amount of power, and we're going to need the involvement of state, local government, and private organizations in order to solve this problem. In order to stabilize climate at twice its pre-industrial levels, we'll need, to stabilize carbon dioxide levels at twice their pre-industrial level, we'll need to reduce emissions worldwide by about 85%. And given the United States' contribution to that, we'll need to reduce even more in the United States. Now, the good news is that state, local governments, and a lot of the more responsible, large multinational corporations are doing quite a bit to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. A number of states have been working to develop climate plans. They use a facilitative process involving stakeholders that's usually mediated by a group that's very active here in Pennsylvania called the Center for Climate Strategies, to bring in the groups from all sectors of the economy, from transportation, from residential, commercial, industrial, agriculture, waste, forestry, and to evaluate options. And there are over 350 different options that they've identified.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the religious role in all of this. I think some people may have a skewed impression. We hear from prominent conservative religious leaders, James Dobson and Jerry Falwell, and who are still saying that the scientific evidence is still on shaky ground. But tell us about the religious community in general and their response to global warming.
Well, this is a very important issue to the religious community. We see it as an issue of morality. The Bible tells us, the Hebrew Bible in Micah, when asked, what does God expect of us? We are to seek justice, to walk humbly, to love kindness. The path that we are on is not a path to justice right now. We understand at this point what the result of our actions are. For many decades we did not. We now understand fully. We have alternate paths that we could choose. Our country has not chosen to take those alternate paths. We see that we're hurting people and we refuse to change our ways. That is not a moral position.
Getting back for a moment to the Cool Cities programs, there have been a number of councils who have not signed up for the program because they say they simply don't know enough about global warming at this point.
Well, it's true, and that leads you to understand that there's a huge public education campaign that's needed. The danger is that you overwhelm people with facts and they get scared and they're overwhelmed and they feel frozen in inaction. But if you can break it down into manageable components, things that you can do locally, you can do personally, you can do regionally, county level, city level, and that sort of thing, it seems more manageable. I'm optimistic that we can, make a big difference by implementing at these different levels. The challenge is to convince folks that they have a role to play. There are economic interests out there who are not interested in seeing change the way we're calling for. They are interested in the status quo, and they are powerful, whether it's in the political arena in Harrisburg or in other places. So we have to educate our leaders and let them know that citizens expect this, expect change, expect action, and elect the people that will make action.
Talk, if you would, Joy, a little bit about mobilizing the religious community, because again, I do think there is this perception. You've got the religious right with Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma saying that global warming is one of the biggest hoaxes perpetuated on the American public. But you are out there talking and engaging community groups and church groups all over the state.
Absolutely. I work with hundreds of congregations, religious leaders, senior leaders at the bishop level who have been working on this. You mentioned before that, for example, James Dobson is still attacking anyone who suggests that this is an issue that needs attention. Well, he's in an increasingly small corner with his ilk. The Christian evangelical community has come out increasingly strongly on this issue in the last year and a half. Reverend Richard Cizik of the National Association of Evangelicals has been an eloquent and wonderful leader on this. The evangelicals see this as an issue of morality because, as we're already seeing, global warming will hurt first and foremost the poor around the world. Those who are least able to defend themselves, those least able to get out of harm's way. And the evangelical community, which is large and powerful politically in this country, says that we are called by God to protect the poor. Therefore, we must address global warming in a meaningful way.
She's really talking about the winners and losers. Dr. Alley, what is the correlation between warming and disease?
Yeah. There certainly are some diseases that are limited by the mosquito freezing to death in the winter. And so if you count on freezing to death in the winter to protect you from disease and you don't freeze in the winter, the disease can spread. That doesn't mean it will get you. If you have screens, if you have bug dope on, maybe it doesn't get you. But it makes it possible. It makes it something to worry about. And typically, it makes it really hard for poor people who don't have screens and bug dope.
Dr. Tuana, Talk a little bit about the intergenerational justice component of all of this. We've just begun, as we saw in that video, we've just begun to raise CO2 levels, and if we continue at this pace, certainly the changes will be bigger and greater. As one of the scientists, and I believe it was Dr. Alley, pay now or pay more later seems to be part of the equation.
We have just begun to change the temperature. At this point, for me, I won't see that many changes, but my children and my children's children will really be living in a world that is phenomenally different if we continue as we're doing today. So I think that as we talk to people about the ways in which this is an ethical issue, we have to look more broadly than simply how it might impact current lives. We have to look at the future. I mean, a good way to think about it is in one of our Native American traditions, do nothing today without thinking about its impact 7 generations from now. And not only on human populations, but also animal species. We can have profound impacts, particularly if Richard is right about abrupt climate change.
In fact, you've said that climate change was abrupt in the past, and there's no reason to believe that it won't be abrupt in the future.
Yeah, I think that it's very important when we look at our forecasts of the future, there is a central estimate. This is what we're facing, and that's what you saw in the video. And there's uncertainty on that, and this is real. This is science. There is uncertainty, and it could be better than that, and it could be worse. But what keeps coming out of our studies is that there's a lot more room on the bad side.
I think the world is looking for leadership from the United States, and maybe this is something you can address. You know, nations are unlikely to agree to a global solution unless it's perceived as just.
That's correct, and the United States is the elephant of climate change. We emit a grossly disproportionate percentage of global emissions. We'll also be the best able to adapt. The people in Bangladesh, the 200 million people who are going to be displaced, won't be able to adapt as readily. Where will they go?
And in fact, there may be some benefits to some regions of the United States, and so that begs the question, how do you establish policy?
Right. The United States traditionally has been a leader internationally in environmental matters. It was a leader in climate change. Up to and including the negotiation of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was signed by the first President Bush. There was a change in policy, particularly with the current administration. And the current administration in Massachusetts versus EPA in the issue went out of its way to come up with a justification for not taking any action to address climate change. And frankly, why they did that is baffling, particularly given what the states have been doing. And the states in the United States have a lot of the traditionally progressive states and some very conservative states like South Carolina have decided that they want to reassert the United States leadership and are showing that it can be done.
All right. My guess is there are some questions percolating in the audience, and please just raise a hand, and one of our audio people will be by with a microphone. Until they get there, though, I'm curious to know a little bit more about Massachusetts versus EPA. What does it mean that you prevailed in that April 2nd?
Well, there's a narrow meaning and a much wider meaning. The precise issue that was before the court was whether the United States has the power under the existing Clean Air Act to address greenhouse gas emissions, and whether the EPA properly denied a petition to regulate emissions from automobiles under Section 202, which directed that the United States, that the EPA regulate emissions which can reasonably be anticipated to endanger health or welfare. Prior to the Bush administration, the current Bush administration, EPA had always interpreted the Clean Air Act to apply to greenhouse gas emissions, and it was always anticipated in signing international agreements like the Framework Convention that would be the tool that would be used. There was a flip-flop on that, and the court properly rejected that flip-flop, which was contrary to the clear words of the statute.
What will it mean, though, to people in Massachusetts?
What it will mean is that, first of all, immediately EPA has to go back and reconsider whether it will adopt regulations on emissions from automobiles. And it can still refuse to do that. The science wouldn't support it. I think eventually that will occur, because it will have to occur, whether it's under this administration or a future administration. It also means, given the standards elsewhere in the Clean Air Act, that the Clean Air Act should apply across the economy. So it will mean that there will be a federal response of some sort, and a response that can incorporate a lot of the state actions.
Okay, we have a question. Go ahead, please.
What is Pennsylvania doing to provide homeowners like myself with tax credits so that we can afford Energy Star appliances, energy efficient windows? Are there tax credits? And are there things that citizens can do? Is there laws that we can advocate for?
Governor Rendell has proposed a broad and sweeping energy independence initiative. One of the components of it has to do with providing incentives for individuals, people who have homes and small businesses, to take advantage of rebates for trading in an old clunky air conditioner or refrigerator and buying an Energy Star rated replacement. And this is $100. If it's passed by the General Assembly, you'd get $100 for trading in your old clunkers there for appliances like that. A more exciting and even bigger and exciting proposal that the governor has put forward is to provide incentives for people to install solar energy generating equipment on their homes, photovoltaic electricity generating facilities. The proposal would be to pay for up to half the cost of an installation of a solar array on a home or small business. And because those are significant costs up front, paying 50% of it could mean that you could get perhaps up to $15,000 towards the cost of installation. And that could dramatically reduce your energy bills each year, saving energy, generating it locally.
Joy?
I just want to add to what Jeff said, that indeed Governor Rendell and Secretary of Environmental Protection Kathleen McGinty in Harrisburg have put forth these very good, very helpful proposals about energy efficiency and solar power, but they're not law yet. They're not law until the legislature passes them in Harrisburg. So please contact your state senators, your state representatives, and tell them we want this law in Pennsylvania.
Go ahead, please.
What's the comparable set of changes that need to happen in the business community to the changes that we are being asked to make as individuals?
Do you have a taker for that question?
Well, I think because energy prices are escalating, there are built-in incentives for businesses to start to take advantage of energy savings devices and installing more energy efficient technologies. Just by making the right decisions, they can save themselves money, and it ends up helping us with global warming. But as far as requiring reductions in energy use, that hasn't been put forward yet. It's basically creating mechanisms for businesses and individuals to take advantage of it. Time of day pricing for energy is another way. You can eliminate the need for larger, newer power plants by using energy during the evening and off-peak hours. And companies are being encouraged to sign agreements that if we get close to a blackout situation, they will shut down their energy use to help to prevent these spikes in energy that cause the blackouts. And the reason we build new power plants is because we start to run out of capacity with power generation.
We're going to take a question over here in just a moment, but I wanted to say one thing to Joy, and that is that Pennsylvania emits more global warming pollution than 105 developing countries combined. So that's an astonishing contribution.
Yes, astonishing and horrifying, I think. We're the third worst state in terms of global warming pollution, trailing only Texas and California, each of which have far larger populations than we do. Pennsylvania, just the 12 million of us in the state, create 1% of the world's total global warming pollution.
And of course, coal is implicated in this.
It's because more than half of our electricity comes from the burning of coal, and coal emits just a whole big bunch of carbon dioxide when it's burned. But again, because we're such a major contributor to this problem, makes it even more compelling that we respond to the problem.
We have a question here. Go ahead, please.
What are some of the unintended consequences of using biomass, and especially corn fuel, and is it really efficient?
We spend so much energy growing corn that while it does appear that you get more energy back than you put in, it's not by a lot. A gallon of gas from corn, you spent 3/4, 8/10 of a gallon of gas to get it. I think most people who are looking at that think that long-term turning food into fuel is probably not the way to go, because eventually there will be hungry people somewhere. But if you're building a plant to turn corn into fuel and you figure out how to turn corn cobs into fuel, suddenly you can use the plant. And there are many people at Penn State, people elsewhere, working very hard on this. How do you turn cellulose? How do you turn other things that we wouldn't eat into fuel? And I think there's optimism on that. I really think the people in that say that we're not there this year, we're not there yet next year, but that we will get there. We will figure out how to use the waste for fuel rather than using the food.
But we have to do it in a very careful way, because one of the things that are being suggested is, well, if we can turn the waste into fuel, we could make it more efficient by growing corn that has more of the waste. And so people are looking at bioengineering corn for the purpose of fuel production, which, if they were successful, sounds like a good idea, except that you actually can have those genes moving into other crops, other corn crops that aren't designed for energy. Again, every time we as a country or as a global nation try to solve this problem, we need our very best. And not just our very best scientists. We really need our ethicists, we need religious perspectives at the table, and we need to be working together.
But there could be fear out there that looking ethically at everything and the potential consequences could actually stymie us from taking action. You know, we look at the corn situation, corn being the prima donna of crops, but we have ethanol converting plants going up in Pennsylvania all over the state. How do you address that looking at every possible angle could prevent us from doing anything?
I would address it by saying that one of the best ways to make sure that people are really going to stand behind decisions that are made is if they have the feeling that this is a fair and a just decision. That when you have people who either feel disenfranchised or who feel that they're being treated in an unjust way, they'll not participate. And this is a problem big enough, we really need people to be working together on it.
A lot of the controversy over biomass-based fuels is really based on, I think, misperceptions. And some of those misperceptions are perpetrated by the fact that we aren't involving people in the decision-making. In fact, if you look at what people mean when they say biomass, they don't mean corn to ethanol. They mean a variety of things. First of all, one of the things they mean is wood. Penn State just did or cellulosic matter. You can actually use wood in local district heating and electric plants. In the case of corn even, you don't necessarily just turn the corn into ethanol. If you separated the protein from the corn, the sugar actually is bad for the cows. It produces a lot of cow burps and produces methane, which is a major contributor to climate change. Well, it turns out that it's not the protein in the corn, it's the sugar. If you separate the protein, you could maintain the feed content and still use the ethanol to produce energy rather than cow burps.
Something to ponder. You have a question, sir?
Yes, I want to get back to the carbon tax issue because it seems to me that from an ethical perspective, this is a terrific way to address the problem on a broad base. And I'd really like to hear what some of the plans are for carbon taxes. I agree it's a third rail of politics, but if some of us in this room get working on it, we can make it more attractive.
In terms of the structure, you could do a tax on emissions. You would have a tax on fuel, and then a tax on electricity, and then provide appropriate credits so that you don't create double taxation, basing the tax on the global warming intensity. So it's something that actually probably could fairly readily be accomplished as a policy matter.
Joy?
Actually, 8 of the states in the Northeast, some of the Mid-Atlantic states and New England are implementing a mini Kyoto Treaty, if you will. It's called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI or RGGI, in which they've agreed that they will actually start to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions from their coal-burning plants, from their power plants. So it is, in essence, a carbon tax. Pennsylvania has been invited to participate in this agreement, and so far we are officially an observer but not a participant. So we're going to the dance, but we're sitting out all the dances. It's going to be a big political step for a big coal state like Pennsylvania to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. But again, we, the people, need to put the pressure on our leaders. They will respond to us if they hear enough. So there is actually some good news.
Okay, we have a question over here.
What kind of job opportunities does reducing carbon provide? For example, looking at biofuels in Pennsylvania versus, I think there are only, approximately about 5,000 jobs actually working in coal and coal extraction. So wouldn't there actually be a lot more job opportunities that would open up if we actually moved away from a coal-based kind of production?
Joy has an answer.
Yeah, I think there are about 7,000 coal miners left in the state. So out of 12 million, it's very small. And I wouldn't want to send my son down into a coal mine. That's not a very desirable job, I think. But speaking directly to your point, clean energy industries like the wind industry, which is already emerging in Pennsylvania with wind farms all across the state, are bringing good, solid paying jobs. One of the federal bills that the Interfaith Climate Change is working on is the passage of a federal renewable energy standard, which would get the country to, by the year 2020, 20% of our electricity nationally would have to come from clean sources. Research by the Union of Concerned Scientists has shown that that bill would bring 5,800 new jobs to Pennsylvania on top of existing jobs. And in fact, clean energy development is responsible for 80% greater number of jobs being created than fossil fuel energy development. It's good news.
Yeah, last fall, the president of the U.S. Steelworkers, Leo Gerard, joined with Carl Pope, who's the national director of the Sierra Club, for a tour of the country pushing renewable energy. And I heard Leo Gerard, the steelworker president, say that he had an epiphany when he realized that there's more steel in a wind turbine than there is in an automobile. and so it's very much self-interest, but the steelworkers are strong proponents of renewable energy because they know it's going to produce jobs. And in fact, we've got companies like Gamesa, the Spanish wind company, that have set up shop in Pennsylvania in both Bucks County and in Cambria County, places that could use the jobs.
We have a question back here.
Yes, I understand that Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and correct me if I'm wrong, does not reduce carbon dioxide levels by 2% per year until the year 2015. If that is so, Dr. Alley, do you think we have that much time to delay on this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions about when do we hit the threshold, when is the end, and it depends on what you care about. Humans are the greatest weed ever invented. We will be here. We actually don't know how to kill ourselves off. We do know how to make our lives much more difficult. If you're worried about rare and endangered species, you should be getting worried already. Because if you have some poor orchid hanging on in a little bog and it has to move 1,000 miles across cornfields and parking lots, it's in trouble. If you're worried about your economy in your backyard, we've got a while. And so it's sort of the question of what are you worried about tells you how long before you push the panic button. I believe that when you poll the scientists of the world, that they believe that we have a window. We have not crossed so many thresholds and put ourselves in so much trouble that we're doomed. But the longer you wait, the more worried they get.
I have a question, and it's about the people I worry about, who are my children and my children's children. And I just wonder, what is being done to get this on the curricula of high schools and elementary schools, where the solutions are going to come from, if they don't come from us who are a little slower to pick up, I guess?
Dr. Alley?
Personally, I've been in the schools many times, and I am frustrated no end. I can't get to all the classes. And I don't know what is being done curricularly. It's a wonderful question that I should have an answer for.
Jeff?
Well, I know that the state has an environmental education curriculum. I can't tell you what the criteria are for the global warming or energy component of it, though. Maybe
there is. I know there is a global warming and energy component, and there are standards for the 4th, I think 8th and 12th grades. But I don't know what they teach, although I imagine it includes a lot of the information we're seeing.
Joy. And since we're not the professional educators of the children up here, again, the answer is go to your school boards, go to your local school boards and demand of them that they get this into the curriculum.
The film that you saw today that began this panel will actually be used. We're going to wrap curriculum around it and make it available to secondary schools across the country.
Very good. Go ahead, please.
In the area of natural resources and everything, is there a way that we can take the natural resources and actually store them? Is anybody looking into that? Because I know, for example, I've had experience with wind energy. And in California, for example, you get your strongest winds at night, and there's all this wasted energy. Is there any research going into energy? We can save it and use it the next day so there aren't blackouts when everybody has their air conditioning back on.
Yes.
The simple answer is yes. It is a hard one. I mean, this is essentially the question of the battery. And if we had batteries, solar would be way better already. Wind would be way better already. We'd be most of the way there. The hydrogen economy, hydrogen is not an energy source. It's a fancy battery. And it will be a combination of things ultimately that likely will involve batteries. And maybe hydrogen, we will have to see, maybe, pumping water up and letting it come back down. The larger the integration of your energy system, the more you smooth out fluctuations in wind. You could certainly imagine if you actually had a globally integrated energy system, the sun is shining. And so local has much more, if you're doing your house on solar and the cloud goes over, you're off. But if you're talking to the grid and bringing it back, now somebody else has sun while you're in cloud. And so there's a lot of work going on this. There will not be a silver bullet, but there will be many.
There's some really neat things being done looking at distributed energy across the grid, because rather than the big power plant, we're looking at having a whole lot of little power plants, solar and so forth. But one of the things that people are looking at is the idea, for example, ideas like plugging in your hybrid so that the battery charges up when there's wind or when there's sun, and then it discharges in the late afternoon when we all turn on our air conditioners.
I don't mean to rain on the party, but I have a little concern, which is that we talk about these individual measures that we can each undertake. In fact, that's one of the sort of closing themes of the Gore movie too. And I have a little concern that this may actually diffuse public motivation and action to get the major actors to do something to help solve the problem. So I'm concerned that manufacturers will still continue to build SUVs that have poorer mileage per gallon than cars we were building 50 years ago. So my question is, do we really have to sort of should we maintain the focus also on some of these major issues, building better public transportation infrastructures, improving efficiency of vehicles? And if we want to do that, are we going to have to talk in terms not just of ethics, but also of overall economic efficiency when we address corporate sector?
Yeah, let me start, and I think several of us would like to try that one. But there have been environmental issues that clearly can be solved by individuals. We do not have a federal police person around the corner at the men's room to make sure that you wash your hands when you come out. We can take care of that one on our own. There clearly are environmental issues that have been solved by our institutions. We did not have to fundamentally get rid of our refrigerators to handle the chlorofluorocarbons, which are going to fix the ozone hole as time passes. This one is sufficiently pervasive in the economy that it very clearly will take our institutions and our individuals.
You wanted to add to that?
Certainly, public transportation, control of sprawl, creation of walkable, bikeable communities are all types of measures that we have to implement. We also have to implement strict emissions controls. We have to have alternative sources of energy or non-carbon-based sources of energy. And we can't afford to abandon any CO2 saving measure. Even the LED lights, for instance, is just one element. And what you save is you save a megaton here, a kiloton there, and eventually it adds up.
Dr. Alley, you've talked with congressmen and senators by invitation. Have you noticed a change in tone and tenor when it comes to starting to act on this?
Yeah, it was fascinating. We were down. I came back from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We were invited down to testify to a House committee. We briefed a Senate committee and another House committee. And not everyone, but many of them. We came in, we said, 5 years putting together this giant report on the science. Let me show you the science. They said, we knew that. Tell us what to tell us what to do about it. And unfortunately, what I said is, well, I'm not the person to ask. These are the people to ask, and you are the people to ask. But there is a lot of acceptance is rising that, in fact, they did pay for the science. They got what they paid for. Congress, the Senate, they have jobs. They're actually very good at their jobs. And their jobs are to face reality, to deal with uncertainty, and to move forward. And they certainly never say, absolutely, positively, 100% prove to me that you know what the economy will be next year before I pass this budget. You've never heard that. They say, give us your best shot and we'll go with it, okay? I personally believe that the scientific basis for our understanding of global warming is way better than the scientific basis for a whole lot of things that are past. And the sort of we don't know, we know it as well as most of the things you're dealing with. And I believe that they are actually coming to the same conclusion.
Do you, Jeff?
Well, I think they're slowly coming to the same conclusion, but there's a lot of politicians that are out there who would like to have a silver bullet, pass it, and then move on to the next issue. And as Bob said, it's going to be a variety of choices from column A and column B. One of the biggest things we could do is pass the requirements to develop more fuel-efficient automobiles. 40 miles per gallon is technologically achievable, and you can still have a variety of vehicles to choose from. But the automakers and other economic interests like the oil industry have opposed that. Things are changing now, and I think we're going to build some momentum for that. We can get that through. That deals with a significant component of it. It's a big one. But then we have to deal with stopping emissions from power plants. We have to cap the emissions and start bringing them down, and that's going to be more complicated unless we can get more of these renewable energy sources online.
Okay, we're going to take two questions, one here, and then we're going to wrap things up. Go ahead, please.
I wonder how you would address the relationship of our belief in growth, our certainty that that's the thing to do, with the reality of this being a finite planet with 6 billion people already and 3 more billion within, decades ahead.
Joy?
Well, I think we need to define what growth is. Quality of living. We want to constantly see the quality of living improved. not necessarily just the quantity of what we have. We can't all have more things all the time and get to 9 billion people and survive, at least not most of us. But we're in no way suggesting that the economy needs to shrink in order to address this problem. We've talked about ways in which economic growth will occur. Bringing more jobs to the state will reduce our global warming impact and improve the economics of the state. So I think unqualified growth, no, we can't do that anymore, but that's not what we're suggesting. We're suggesting ways in which the greater good is constantly increased.
Anyone want to add to that?
The other thing I would add is that there are a lot of people who are advocating sustainable development for all countries, so that as southern countries develop, assisting them and thinking about how their development can be sustainable and being very attentive to what you really need, but also then thinking about how we can make our living much more rich and much less carbon intensive at the same time.
Okay, we have a question over here.
This might sound a little contradictory, actually, but given that it's a large sector of how our country operates, is there anything being done to make the military more sustainable? Is there a green weapon?
Can anyone feel that?
I'll try just a little bit. We could wade into a quagmire of politics very quickly, but there are a lot of smart developments that are being done there. If you have the choice of sending a little drone with a camera to look versus sending a couple of people in a big, heavy plane to get shot down, which would you rather do? And so, in fact, I do think that you will find, if you look carefully, you will find places where there is some bright thinking going on, that part of it is to keep people out of harm's way, but part of it does have as a spin-off that it would reduce the carbon intensity. The difference between taking a very small exploding device and putting it exactly where you want to, and taking a huge number of very large exploding devices and taking down a city is real.
All right, I think in some respects we're preaching to the choir with this particular audience, but with that said, I'd like to go around the horn here and end with Joy, who I hope will come up with something very inspirational for us. But what's the take-home message, Dr. Alley?
The science is good. Listen to these people and start talking about what to do with it.
Dr. Tuana.
What I would say is live and vote as if life depends on it.
Jeff?
I really echo the last comment and ask your candidates whether or not they are willing to take the lead on issues like this. Make sure that they address it. Don't just read what they say. Go out and ask them.
I think that we can do a lot. There's hope. And that if we do the right thing, life will be better, but we need the political will to do it.
Joy?
I would challenge everybody to make one change in your own life this week. Buy another CFL to put in your house and make a call to a legislator or a school board member and tell them what you want them to do.
All right, thank you all so much. Thanks to our studio audience and to our partners in this program. That's Penn State's Rock Ethics Institute and Penn State's Research Unplugged series. And of course, our panelists, Dr. Richard Alley, Penn State Evan Pugh Professor of Geosciences, Dr. Nancy Tuana, Director of Penn State's Rock Ethics Institute, Jeff Schmidt, Director of Sierra Club Pennsylvania Chapter, Robert McKinstry, Penn State's Goddard Professor of Forestry and Environmental Resources Conservation, and Joy Bergey with Penn Future and the Pennsylvania Interfaith Climate Change Campaign. And for all of us at Penn State Public Broadcasting, I'm Patty Satalia. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.